So what if I told you there was an island surrounded by perfect lefts, perfect rights, A-frame peaks, beaches, and that there was nobody out ever? A place like this does actually exist. The only catch is nobody's allowed to surf it. So North Sentinel Island is a small island off the west coast of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Technically, the island belongs to India, but North Sentinel Island is home to one of the last uncontacted tribes on Earth. The island is famous for being off limits and out of bounds for any outsiders. Now, North Sentinel has got a super interesting history, and anthropologists believe that tribes have lived on the island for 60,000 years. It's believed there are an estimated 80 to 150 tribespeople living on the island, but some anthropologists argue that this could be up to 500. Nobody really knows much about the customs and culture of the North Sentinelese, other than their general hostility towards outsiders. But despite the frosty welcoming parties, there have been several cases of contact throughout history. In 1771, an East India shipping vessel sailed past the island and the crew spotted lights and fire on the island. However, they just sailed past, kind of writing it off as just another Andaman tribe, much like the Onji and Jawara tribes that lived on Little Andaman next door. Then, for nearly 100 years, the island was seemingly forgotten. After the British colonised India, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands fell under British rule. And after occupying the islands, a naval party led by Maurice Portman landed on North Sentinel to check things out further. When they arrived, they pretty much found a completely deserted island, as if the islanders had seen them coming. However, they found a group of 6 North Sentinelese sort of straggling behind, so the crew stole them and took them back to Port Blair, the capital of Little Andaman. Shortly after arriving in Port Blair, most of the Sentinelese fell sick and shortly died afterward. Then Portman decided it would be a good idea to take the 2 younger surviving children back to the islands, so he dropped them off back on North Sentinel with some gifts. It's not well documented whether this encounter infected the rest of the island's people. What we do know is it did little to improve the general hostility towards visitors. Then a ship by the name of the Nineveh ran aground on the reef just off the coast of Sentinel. 20 crew members were stranded on the beach, and they survived on the island for 3 days until suddenly tribespeople came out of the jungle and attacked them with spears and bows and arrows. They fought back with sticks and stones before eventually being rescued. In 1974, India gained independence from the British, and so the Andaman and Nicobar Islands fell under their due restriction. Throughout this time, India sent out various parties to make contact with the people of North Sentinel, and most of these expeditions were led by Indian anthropologist Triloknath Pandit. Pandit and his crew made various expeditions to North Sentinel. They were always met with hostility, despite bringing gifts for the people. Then in 1974, a National Geographic filming crew ventured towards Sentinel, had to turn back quickly after one of the crew was shot in the leg by an arrow. Like the Nineveh, the Primrose was another ship that shipwrecked itself just off the coast of Sentinel. This happened in 1981, and the crew was eventually rescued by helicopter. Now, some crews returned to the island to salvage scrap metal from the boat. During this time, there were encounters on the boat. It said that the tribespeople were shocked at blowtorches and the tools that the salvage crew had, and the counters were hostile, but nothing violent happened in this time. Through the 1990s, expeditions to North Sentinel became more frequent, but many of them were still met with the typical Sentinelese hostility. However, one crew did manage to get a little further. During this encounter, relations seemed to be improving. However, things suddenly ended when one of the local people made a cutthroat gesture towards the crew, suggesting the crew had outstayed their welcome. Since then, there have been few interactions with the North Sentinelese, and the few expeditions that have ventured close to the islands haven't got any further than Pandit did with his crew on that day. After the 2004 tsunami, a helicopter flew over North Sentinel to check on the local people's whereabouts after much of the surrounding islands and region had been devastated by the Boxing Day tsunami. Interestingly, the people seemed to be fine on the island, and some of them even fired arrows toward the helicopter. The most recent contact attempt was by John Allen Chow, an American missionary who wanted to spread Christianity to the island. He actually made 3 separate visits to the island, getting closer each time, but unfortunately on the 3rd visit he was shot and killed with an arrow. This is the last contact attempt by anyone from the outside world. Since then, the government has imposed a strict exclusion zone around the island, banning anyone from venturing within 5.6 kilometers of the coast. So where does that leave us in terms of surfing? Well, in short, you can't surf on North Sentinel. And it only takes a quick Google search to see that the island is covered in world-class waves. There's lefts, there's rights, there's like a sweeping right beachy point. And they're all waves that none of us are gonna be able to surf. I was watching a documentary the other day, so I went on Google Maps, had a look at North Sentinel and saw that it was just surrounded by world-class waves. Obviously, if it wasn't North Sentinel, I wouldn't be making this video. So has anyone actually surfed on North Sentinel? And the answer is actually yes. There have been some very conspicuous stories of surfers venturing to the island and surfing some of the waves there. There's actually a book called Mine that I haven't read yet, but I think that details a Kiwi guy's experience of surfing the wave. There's also a story which you can read on SwellNet, I'll leave the link in the description. But this story details a boat of professional surfers and filmers who sailed from Little Andaman Islands towards North Sentinel and actually surfed one of the reefs just off the coast. The story is a little bit vague and for obvious reasons it doesn't get into too many details, but from what I can read, the crew parked up off North Sentinel, had an early morning session at one of the reefs before some of the local tribes people paddled out on a canoe toward the boat. Now, the article states that they were actually scared away by the music on the boat and didn't actually attack them, but the crew left pretty quickly afterwards. It also says that many of the surfers and crew on that boat didn't actually know they were on North Sentinel, and they actually thought they were in Indonesia, not India. So I don't know how you can fly to a country and then suddenly think you're in a different one. So I'll let you make your own minds up as to what you think of that. But yeah, apart from that, there haven't been many other stories, and for obvious reasons. So where do things stand today, and should you go and surf North Sentinel? The short answer is no. Unless being arrested by the Indian Navy or getting shot in the chest with an arrow as you come out the barrel sounds like your cup of tea, you should definitely avoid surfing on North Sentinel. Today, the 5.6 kilometer exclusion zone around the island still stands. The Indian Navy patrol the area regularly. Not only is this exclusion zone in place to protect the well-being of the island people from, foreign diseases, invasive species, that kind of thing, but also to protect visitors from being killed. It works for both parties, and I think being one of the last uncontacted tribes on Earth, that's something we all have to respect. They've made it very clear they don't want anything to do with outsiders. So putting those people in jeopardy and your life at risk just to surf a few waves is obviously not worth it. And things will remain this way for the foreseeable future. So unless that sounds like your kind of place and you want to risk being shot or arrested, be my guest. But for now, I'm going to stick to Bali.